The ANC says it's going ahead with compiling provincial and national lists, even if only 51% of the branches have completed their candidate selection process. The party's National Executive Committee had extended the nomination list deadline from September to 15th October. Let's now get an idea of how many branches have complied. And joining us on that is ANC's Electoral Committee Secretary, Chief Livhuwani Matsila. Chief, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on tonight here on In Focus. How many branches have missed their deadlines?
Well, I think the question should be how many branches have successfully held their BGMs and submitted their nomination lists to their provincial offices. At this stage, we are sitting with a situation that the deadline has now been reached, which was the 15th of October. We are now collating the data to be able to report to the National Executive Committee in terms of the province, how many of our branches held their BGM successfully and have submitted their lists, so that we can then have a recommendation to the National Executive Committee which says that the processes post the completion of BGMs must then take place in earnest, so that we have the list ready as soon as possible. This is where we are now. The statistics are being finalized, so tomorrow we've got a meeting of the Electoral Committee where the stats will be presented and then recommendations made to the special NEC that will request afterwards.
What are the electoral guidelines in instances where deadlines, of course, come and go and the nomination process is not finalized at branch level?
The requirement is that in terms of the ANC constitution and procedures, the requirement is that the branches must be given enough time to rectify and improve their membership so that the branches become in good standing to be able to be qualified to hold BGMs and nominate. So you realize that the deadline that we had on the 18th of September was extended to 15th of October to allow that process so that there is sufficient time for branches to participate in numbers in this current process. So this process, in essence, says that the branches of the ANC must be in the majority, having participated in the process. And the majority is anything above 50%. And I say this because there is a confusion of the 70% threshold in terms of branches that should participate. That 70% is a standard procedure that has been imposed by the National Executive Committee and conferences for branches when we go to the elective conferences like we did with the 55th National Conference. So this is a candidate selection process which is similar to the one we did in 2021, where there was no threshold really of how many branches should really participate. The requirement is that there must be sufficient time for branches to be able to participate and improve their membership accordingly.
So if you have collated now the data and the statistics and you present it to the NEC, you are saying it would be the decision then of the national officials to say, well, we are going ahead with the list process if we have met that 51%. So where would the recommendations come from?
The recommendations will come from the Electoral Committee, which is the structure tasked with the nomination processes in the ANC. And I don't think that is a question of 51%. It's a question of saying that we're allowed enough time for branches to be able to prepare themselves and participate in the process. And invariably, you'll find that provinces will achieve different magnitudes in terms of percentage of branches that would have nominated. Some will be at 98%, some at 60%, some at 50%, for instance. All of that will then have an aggregate national figure that will then make us comfortable to go forward. But the rule is that the majority of the branches must have participated in the nomination process for it to be credible.
Yeah. What are the bottlenecks? I mean, that would keep, for example, branches from completing that process. I'm asking you because there are some reports, for example, that indicate that there are divisions in some provinces at branch level, at regional level, and at provincial level. Divisions, for example, on who will be the premier or which names will be submitted as premier, and more poignantly around the female representation at that level?
No, the divisions around who should be the premier will never manifest themselves at the branch level, because there is no nomination for a premier candidate at the level of the branch. And we have dealt away with the slates. If you could see our lists, they are not showing any formidable patterns of slates or factions. Branches are nominating as they wish in terms of who they prefer. The issue of who becomes the premier will be dealt with at the level of the extended provincial executive committee session, the extended PEC, where 3 names are going to be forwarded to the national officials for consideration. And the rule says that out of the 3 names, 2 must be female candidates, to ensure that we do accommodate gender representation at the level of premiers. And the rule also go further to say that where we've got female premiers serving their first term, they should be considered amongst the 3 candidates to be interviewed by the national officials. That's where we are. So that division is not there unless it's engineered by those with vested interests. As it is, that's not a big issue in the ANC.
So it's a clear understanding, what you're mentioning now, that current first-term women premiers must automatically be recommended by PECs.
They must be amongst the 3 candidates.
Yeah.
And we're saying that amongst the 3, there must be 2, at least 2 must be female. It could be a situation where all of them are female. There's nothing wrong with that.
And what happens then in instances where you then go ahead, as you're saying, we've given you enough opportunities to participate and be a part of this process, and you still did not, and then you come up with a particular candidate that the branches are not happy with?
Well, I mean, you branches will not be happy with, if you don't participate, then you lose the right not to be happy. You have to be happy with what the majority of the branches are nominating, because 2 months is a good period, sufficient enough for a normal branch of the ANC to convene and reach quorum and ultimately nominate. So if you can't, as a branch, nominate given 2 months, then you probably don't exist as a branch, and that there's nothing much you can do to assist you.
The process of vetting candidates, what does that entail? Because I suppose you're pushing these deadlines because you want to push ahead with this particular process, the holding of interviews and so on and so forth, so that by the time elections come, all these representatives have gone through that process.
Yes, indeed. You know, all the candidates that are going to be nominated by branches will be subjected to interviews, rigorous interviews for that matter, to look at their overall suitability in terms of skills, qualifications, and experience to be able to represent the ANC in Parliament and the legislatures. We'll also look at vetting of criminal records. Anybody with any criminal record whatsoever is not going to be allowed to be on the list or to represent the ANC in Parliament and the legislature. And also the issue of financial declarations. We'll want to know for each member or candidate, what kind of assets do they have, what is the value of the assets in their possession, and how do they accumulate such assets, so that where necessary there could be some lifestyle audits conducted or investigations carried out to see if people accumulated the types of wealth they have through credible means. So it is a thorough going process. We'll also look at the performance review of those who are currently serving as members of Parliament or the legislatures. Those who are in the executive as MECs and ministers would be looked at from their current performance to indicate if they are really, good enough to return back and serve the people.
As far as academic qualifications for MPs and MPLs at this point, do you have any specified one in terms of your guidelines?
Yes, we are saying that preferably our candidates should have a post-matric qualification, which means your diploma or your degree in the main. And we then say that there could be rare cases where comrades don't have formal qualifications, but their experience cumulatively could then, make them functional like anybody else with qualifications and experience. So it's an objective process looking at an individual on his or her own merit, so that we can look at you and say, what do you have that makes you to qualify if you don't have qualifications, what other experience can you consider that can really make us allow you to go to Parliament and the legislature?
So from where you're sitting now, I mean, the time that you have allocated would have been enough for 4,000 branches. Maybe it's not 4,000 anymore because in September you were sitting at about 46%. So we could say 2,000 plus branches to have dealt with QR code challenges, disputes around membership, disputes around good standing of branches. That is enough time in the processes of the ANC, the electronic system and so on and so forth, to rectify that and fix that.
Yes, it's enough time, and we're on record to say that if a branch of the ANC cannot achieve a quorum and QR codes and other systems in place in a matter of months, then that branch's existence is questionable, because that's too much of a period within which you can fix all challenges. So we believe that those that are serious and are committed will have gone through the processes and are ready and have submitted the list for consideration and processing.
What is the rationale around members who are still currently pending at the Integrity Commission and them being nominated? What happens if the Integrity Commission comes back with an adverse finding after they've been included in the list?
At this point in time, if there is no recommendation that the Integrity Commission would have made to the National Executive Committee in respect of such members, they are not affected in terms of being disqualified. So what it means is that for a member to be disqualified, the Integrity Commission would have made firm recommendations to the National Executive Committee, and those recommendations would have been accepted and implemented by the National Executive Committee. Now, at the time when that happens, if it happens during the process or after the process, then the step-aside rule will then kick in, and people will then have to step aside, and others who are on the line will then occupy the vacant spaces.
And does that then include the fact that there are some others who would be currently under investigation of some sort, maybe have gone through the Integrity Commission process, but in terms of the laws of the country, they're still under investigation? Would they be eligible for nomination?
Yes, the only time where candidates will be disqualified is when they are criminally charged in the court of law, or where there's a conviction in the court of law. If that does not happen, investigations are still going on and they are not charged yet, and they are not going to courts, they are not really going to be affected. So we wait until there is there are court proceedings in place. Then we say, look, finish your court issues, then we can see whether you will be able to be on our list or fit for deployment.
There are others that would say that is probably a bit of inconsistency if you look at how certain candidates were disqualified, for example, from participating at the Newzroom conference because of pending court cases where they were not finalized, but they were still in the court process.
Yes, what we are saying is that at the time when you are facing criminal charges, there are many more other comrades that could be deployed. There's nobody who has got a right to be in Parliament. So we say, let's allow a process where you are cleared, or the matter is finalized one way or the other, and we take matters from there. It's difficult for the ANC to deploy somebody who is criminally charged in the court of law. That tarnishes our image, and it's not good in terms of us building the public confidence to be able to win the elections.
Yeah, but you're saying you're drawing a distinction between being nominated and being deployed. You might not be able to deploy, but if branches so seek to nominate you while you're still in the court process, it's okay.
Yeah, let's say the branches will nominate somebody who is criminally charged and facing court challenges. The rules don't allow that to happen. If it happens, it's a mistake, because those rules are approved by the National Executive Committee and distributed to the branches. But the problem is that the branches may not know that somebody is criminally charged, which is where the vetting process kicks in, to say to the branches, look, we have vetted the people in accordance with the rules, so and so is criminally charged, and therefore is not going to be allowed to go to represent you in Parliament at this point in time.
And so what would happen in instances where even the president of the country could be facing some investigations and being charged and so on and so forth, the kind of chaos that we saw building up to the conference?
Let's separate two things. Investigations and criminal charges are two different things materially. So if there's an investigation, like there are many investigations throughout the country, until they result in criminal charges, nobody is going to be disqualified from being on the list or being recommended for deployment in Parliament or legislature.
And of course, when do you see this particular process now being completed?
We aim to have completed all processes by mid-December, so that early January the candidates can also join the national executive-led campaign of the ANC, where we're campaigning for the elections. So as it is, come the 15th of December, we should have concluded all the interviews, vetted everybody. We should have held the extended PEC sessions and also the extended NEC session, which is the ultimate session where the lists are going to be approved for processing.
Chief Livhuwani Matsila, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on this evening as ANC's Electoral Committee Secretary, there, Chief Matsila, on that deadline that has now come and gone, and of course the steps that will be taken next.